In this video, we're going to show you how to put a set of ape hangers on Harley Davidson Dyna Models 1996 through 2017. Hey folks, Robert here with Hill Country again. We finally got our hands on a 1998 Dyna Wide Glide. And I haven't done a video on a Dyna because we just haven't had one really to show you how to do things with. Anyway, this one's a 98 and most of the Dynas are pretty much the same. A few minor variations, but this would be good for 1996 models all the way through 2017. It should get you through putting some apes on. This one here obviously has seen better days. It went down on the freeway and got some damage to it. The rider wasn't injured, but we got it in here, kind of an insurance deal. So it's a little banged up. Some of it's already kind of taken apart because we've had to check some things out for the adjuster and whatnot. So some of the things coming off are going to go a little faster than they normally would because they're already halfway there. But either way, we'll show you, what needs to be done and take it apart. Follow along and check it out, and we'll show you how it's done. So first things first, we got to get the seat off and get the battery disconnected, and then once we're done with that, we're going to go ahead and get this tank out of the way. So we've got this dash pulled up right here. The connectors and everything, normally I would take this off and separate the dash from the harness, but in this case we've got all these little bulbs and everything, and there's no real way to disconnect it quickly, and these bulbs, if you've ever taken them out, they're a real pain to get back in. So I'm just gonna cover this thing up and kind of lay it to the side and put it back on when we're done. But we have one of these laying around, and these work really well for this job as well as brake calipers and other things. And we're just gonna wrap this bag around here, cover her up, and just ease it on out of the way. We got to get the gas out of the tank, and I highly suggest, if you think about it, don't go fill your bike up before you go home like most people do. So then you got more to drain. Unfortunately, the older models have this crossover line right here. A lot of the newer models, they've eliminated that and the tank comes off without taking the line off. But these have the line, and what I like to do, you're going to get gas on yourself no matter what, but pull that line off, stick a bolt in here, maybe put your hand here, stick a bolt in there to stop the gas flow, and then have another hose to put on this nipple here and run down to your gas can and just let it drain. And that's about the cleanest way to do it. Don't do it in your garage and make your whole house smell like gas. Do it outside, maybe the night before, so the gas can evaporate, and when you bring the bike inside, you're not smelling everything up. If it's on the kickstand, that's why this side is off right here, because on the kickstand, all your gas is mainly gonna drain over to this side. This is the wiring for your fuel gauge. It's up here. Sometimes there's a little connector under there that you can disconnect. Sometimes there's not. In this case, there wasn't, so I'm just gonna cut it and resolder it later. Obviously, your fuel line, hose clamp off, pull the fuel line off, and a lot of people mess this up. On these types of valves, there's a vacuum line here in the back, but you've got to pull that vacuum line off. If you don't remember that, you'll wind up picking this tank up and breaking that vacuum line, and then it's a little bit more of a pain in the butt to get it fixed. But anyway, take that off, and then last thing, you got your tank bolts to pull out, and then the tank will come right off. So one more thing, like a little tip real quick. I always forget to do this. You probably will too until I bring it up. When you take the dash off, especially on the older models, this little rubber piece always falls off. Harley uses the weather strip adhesive. Over time, it just comes loose. These come off, and when you go to put the bike back together, these things keep falling down and giving you trouble putting the dash on, especially with wiring and stuff in there. So what I do when I take this off, or if the bike's gonna sit overnight, I'll super glue or whatever glue this back onto my dash and let it sit overnight, so that when I go put it back together, I'm not fighting it. All right, so next thing, we need to get these old bars out of the way. Undo my clutch cable up here, and I'll take the brake master cylinder off up here and leave the brake line attached so that I'm not making a mess with brake fluid. And then we'll undo the wiring, and then the bars should come right off. This one's 2½ inch. Chalk. Comes out. See this little tab right here on the lever? That is what pushes your brake light switch, which is right here. That pushes this, and this notch here has to line up with that, right? So if you put this on here just like that without pulling the brake lever in and tighten this down, you'll break the end of that switch off. You have to either rotate it in like this or pull the brake lever in when you put this master cylinder on to not break that switch. Because what happens, the switch breaks, you don't know it, and then your brake light's stuck on and you don't know why. And come to find out, once you finally figure out what's going on hours later, you realize that's broke and you don't know how it got broke. Well, it got broke because that broke it because your lever wasn't pushed in when you're putting that on. I've done it many times myself. So here's the real tricky part about Dynas, and we get this call all the time. You know, people get their bars and obviously they have connectors on them, they're pre-wired, and they can't find where the connectors are. You know, they're not up here, and they think it's a one-piece harness from there all the way back to this battery box. Well, it's not. It's just that Harley put the connectors about midway point in the frame. And what they did, they give you this little access panel back here in the rear fender and a bunch of harness wadded up right here, and you have to pull this access panel out, kind of feed this harness down and pull this stuff up, and you'll see the connectors finally come out and expose themselves. One more thing, we took the shocks off because they need to be replaced on this bike, but at the same time, if you take the shocks off, especially when it's lowered like this one, it allows you to raise the bike up and the back tire stays down and gives you more room to get your hand in here and mess with that access panel and the harness. You don't have to take the shock off, just take the bottom bolt out and that'll let the swing arm fall. So I'm going to kind of push that down and pull it down here through and slowly pull it up. You got your nut connector, and then you have to pull a little bit more to get the other one. Okay, so that's super easy, but if you don't know about it, man, you can waste a ton of time. So now that we got the connectors exposed, we're gonna disconnect them obviously, and we gotta get the bars off. But to do that, we gotta take these riser bolts out here. And you can take them out just the way it is, but there's one bolt holding this headlight on, so I'm gonna go ahead and take that bolt out of the bottom and unplug the connector here and get the headlight out of the way. And then I can get a ratchet on these bolts right here and get them out a little bit faster. And then we have our turn signals connector. So now we've got these bolts exposed, and the reason that we take these out is on these older models, the stock bushings, they're made out of rubber, they get really loose and they give you handlebar movement, which this bike doesn't have. I didn't realize it till I got the headlight out that this already has some polyurethane bushings in there. Either way, headlight's out of the way, it's one bolt. That allowed us to get our wires out, you know, quite a bit easier than having to fight around that big old headlight. So now we take the 4 top riser bolts off and then get these bars off. All right, so I just pulled these throttle cables out of here. Most people would take this air filter cover, breather assembly off, and then it's easier to get in there, whatever, and that's probably a better way to do it. Of course, I'm always looking at how to get stuff done faster and more efficient. You can get these things out of there without doing all that. You just have to, on the throttle cable, you have to rotate the throttle back with a screwdriver and kind of hold it, and then fish the end of this thing out of there with a pair of needle nose. When you go back with the new one, try not to fray the cable, you know, be real careful with it, but it's not hard to do. And then the return, the idle cable, that one's real easy to get to, the back one, but you gotta fish this little idle return spring out. And this is in there for mainly for adjustment when you adjust the cables, which I cover in another video. But you can fish them out, fish them back in. It's not hard to do. If you wanna take the assembly off, go ahead. Either way is great, but that's how we do it. One more thing, these little clips here, you can't find these at the hardware store. You have to get them from Harley. Rather than cut them, I just run my cable through there like that, and then once it's run through there, I zip tie the other cable to it, and then that keeps them out of the way. Now the good times start. We're about to mount these bars. This is a set of our 12-inch, 1.5-inch diameter Hellbent handlebars. The reason it's 12-inch, this particular customer is vertically challenged, so 12 is about as high as she's gonna be able to go. But either way, it's a pre-wired setup. You know, we've run all the wiring. We've got our plug and play trademark setup on there. So this is all OEM stuff that plugs right into the harness. There's no wiring hassle. We've got controls, chrome controls, black switches, black and chrome contour grips. And one of the things we started doing recently, if you order grips with one of our kits, we go ahead and put them on for you at no extra charge. And if it's a throttle cable bike like this one, we go ahead and install the throttle cables for you. So all you've got to do is just hook up that end into the carb and adjust them, and you're ready to go. So we're just trying to do as much as we can for you. Outside of that, man, this kit's ready to go on. We're gonna mount them up and see how they feel. Big mistake people make all the time, including myself. You go to get your bars put on, you got everything ready to go, get your clamp on there, no tools. Take it all back off, right? So have your tools. If you want to use a ratchet, that's fine. Have this ready close by somewhere where you can grab it. That way, once you get everything fitted up, boom, you're ready to go. One thing I want to mention, this set of bars doesn't have the turn signals on it like we took off. Most people leave them off, or they mount them to the forks, on a fork type clamp, or if there's an extra bolt hole like this one has, you can mount them there and different things. That keeps you from having to run the wiring in the bars. And not to mention, when you go taller on the handlebars, the turn signal's hanging down right there. I don't know, it doesn't look quite as good in my opinion, and it's somewhat obstructive. It gets in the way of your vision because now your bars are higher. We offer the option, leave them off, that's fine, that's how they come standard. If you want your turn signals up there, we can add wiring to the handlebars. Now it's just gonna be 3 wires on each side, so you'll have 6 wires coming out here that are open-ended, and then 3 wires that come out of the bottom of each switch housing. So you could then take your stock lights and just solder those into place and bolt them back up in there. Again, most people just leave them off. Your rear ones will still work fine, but really it depends on what your local laws are with turn signals. All right, so now the bars are on. First thing you want to do, no matter what model it is, check your electrical. We check all these before they leave our shop. We check them with a voltmeter, ohm meter, continuity, short to ground, all that stuff. So you're not gonna have any problems with it. Now there are problems that can arise during installation, but it's always a good idea to check electrical before you get too much further. That way you don't have to take everything back apart if there's a problem. So you're gonna plug them in, hook your battery back up, turn your key on, and just check your blinkers, horn, all that stuff, make sure it works, and then turn it back off. Assuming that's all good, which it will be, we're gonna go ahead and just pull these wires back into the frame the exact same way we pull them back out. And they stagger these so that they don't get bunched up in that frame, which would make it harder to pull in and out. Just like that, kind of feed it up through here. And then now we can put our block off plate back in. So another common mistake people make, they don't check their cable lengths before they install them. Once the cable's installed, we can't take it back. Most companies are that way. I leave mine in the plastic, go from point A, follow the routing of the old cable up to where it's supposed to go, make sure your length is correct. That way if it's not, you can exchange it. Once you verify the length, tear into it and get it done. When you're changing your clutch cable out, to get this off, you gotta pull the exhaust off to access these screws. Unless you're lucky enough to have maybe a 2-into-1 or something that goes below that and you can access all that. I've learned over the years, rather than pull the exhaust off, because in some cases it's a real pain in the butt, I just take my brackets loose down here, where the exhaust will move a little bit, and then I loosen the bolts at the head. I don't take them off of the head because those are hard to get back on. You got to mess with heat shields and all that mess. I just loosen them up, and my exhaust is totally loose. So I can get an Allen wrench in here and get this cover off, no problem. In this particular case, this exhaust is damaged, so it's getting replaced. So I'm just going to go ahead and remove it, and then we'll put a new exhaust on whenever that comes in. But either way, I'm going to show you how to get this clutch cable out of here and changed. Go ahead and break this loose before we take this cover off. It's easier to turn the transmission cover than it is the cable. So just real quick, I've got a more in-depth clutch cable video that you can watch. I'll put the link up there. I want to talk about this because it happens a lot. When people are screwing this back on, A, don't try to turn the cable. You turn the cover, okay? And B, it should thread on very easily. If it's not, then you have it cross-threaded. It's very easy to do, and these things, this end here is easy to break because there's a hole in the middle of it. It's basically a bolt with a hole in it, so there's less material there to make it strong. So pay attention to what you're doing. It should go on just like that unless there's a burr or something on there. So, you know, just watch it, be careful. And then when you go to tighten this down, you know, I tighten them down after the cover's on because that makes my cover stationary. But you don't have to put a crowbar on it, man. Just go snug. You just want that O-ring to seat and it's snug right there. This cable's not gonna turn because it's affixed everywhere else. It'll seal up just fine. Sometimes people use grease to keep these balls in place a little better. And I like to make sure that the ends of my snap ring are over here in this area or anywhere against the housing and not in the open area. We also want to make sure when we put this back on that we're pushed back that way. Sometimes if it's that way, it can get hung up and it makes you feel like you have clutch problems when you go to adjust it because this is hung right there and it won't spring back. And you can just kind of stick it down in there and then boom. All right, throttle cables are installed, hooked up. I haven't adjusted them yet. If you need more information on that, I've got a separate video that goes more in depth on all that. I'll put the link right up there. Our clutch, we haven't hooked it up yet. We're about to. And we're gonna go ahead and do our brake line, and then from there put the tank on and see how these babies feel. Down, enough to crush the washers. All right, everybody, we've got all of our lines and cables attached. I just tightened up the brake and, you know, the clutch, adjusted the clutch. Last thing we got to do is bleed the brakes. I'm not going to go into that in depth. We have yet another video that that'll show you how to do that, how we do it. We actually use our little bleeder kit. It's a syringe, a couple hoses and whatnot, but we just force fluid from the caliper back up the line to the master cylinder, and man, it's a breeze. You don't need vacuum pumps or any of that stuff. We're gonna put the tank and everything back on it. Again, we're not gonna completely assemble this bike because of the nature it is. We still have other work to do, but we're gonna put the tank on it, seat on it, and sit on it, kind of feel it out, and finish things up. All right, so tank's back on, bolts in. This fuel vent line right here and the crossover line underneath, these older bikes, you know, the rubber kind of gets a little dry rotted in some cases, so it's a good time to check those. And if they are starting to crack, or like this one's See how it ripped when I took it off? I'm gonna go ahead and put a new piece of fuel line on there. Then I don't have to worry about it stranding me somewhere down the road. Get your dash and all those things back on. Just plug your connectors in. You know, again, I didn't completely remove it. I just kind of set it out of the way so everything should go back just nice and tight. You've got your vacuum line on your fuel valve, and then your fuel line, and then your fuel gauge connection. If you remember, which I'm gonna do this tonight, take that rubber piece, that gasket that goes around your dash, and go ahead and super glue it on overnight so it's stuck on there. And you gotta put your dash back on, those things aren't falling off. That's it right there, they're installed. A lot of people may not notice this, but these handlebars, we designed them, you know, a particular way. And the base width here, if you'll notice, is almost perfectly, if not perfectly, in line with the forks. The diameter of the tubes is almost identical to the diameter of the tubes here. So in the perspective, it looks almost like one straight line coming up right here, and it just gives the front end a real clean look. And that's one thing that we focus on the Hellbents, is to give it that clean look to where it looks like it was almost made to be that way, you know what I mean? These bars, just for reference, of course I'm kind of hunched over, but you know, I'm 5'11" on a normal day. These are 12-inch bars. The Dyna wide glides tend to sit a little higher up on the front of the frame than like other models like Sportsters and Softails and whatnot. So these bars are gonna come up higher just because of the frame geometry. The cables, some people don't like this, all right? And I can agree. We make little clamps that go around the handlebars that you can route the cables through to kind of tidy them up. Some people use zip ties. I don't know, you know. I personally wouldn't, but you know, whatever. But you can just tie them out of the way. Keep in mind when you do that though, they still have to move when you turn the handlebars. You know, the cables kind of move and flex when you turn, so don't crank them down too tight where they tear up the outer housing. And by the way, I want to thank all of our subscribers for subscribing. And if you do like the video, please give us a like. If you want to see more, go ahead and subscribe. We'll have more coming your way. Thanks again.